Hello! What about a mystical witch hut that walks where you'd like it to go? It is a bit funny, magical and has something to it like Hold's moving castle, though it is made out of wood and stone. Well, for a house that walks we definitely need some legs, so maybe some bird legs will do. First of all we have to decide the position of the legs. Some of them are a bit harder to do than others, but overall it is doable. For the build I am choosing a position where one leg is dragged on the ground and the other is lifted and bent, similar to this build. Let's start with the leg on the ground as that is easier. To make it easier to see I am using copper blocks, but later I will change it to black wool. Of course you can use any block of your choice. First go up slightly diagonally to the back and after a while change the direction to go diagonally forward. The bend is supposed to be roughly in the middle of it all. All of this is around 20 blocks high, and if you'd like to follow this more closely I'd recommend using a similar height to fit the house on top. Of course also feel free to use this just as inspiration or to change things up. The middle tower is pretty much straight, but to fit in the other two you have to go a bit diagonal. Make sure to have the middle one block longer. To add more dynamic to it you can also lift up 2 or 3 blocks so that the toes curve. It is time to thicken the leg out. That is actually really simple, just add another line of blocks at the front or back and another one to the side. The second leg is off the ground, and if you struggle with this, you could also just build a second one like this and your house will be standing. But to give it some extra dynamic I want to build this one moving. Start building up a few blocks to the side and to the front. You won't need these bottom blocks so you can punch them out again later. From there you want to build a curve going up, transitioning into a diagonal going up and back. The curve will be the middle tower and you can also add a few more blocks to it to make it the right length. See how the diagonal goes more back than up? It should be the same length as in the other leg. Then go forward and up until you reach the same height as the first one. This might require some trial and error and is most likely the hardest part of this build. But from here on it is going to be easier again. Add the other 2 toes, thicken everything out and we are good to go over to build the house. Of course we will detail this further later. For the house I start with the main platform to see how the size is fitting. Make sure it is not too big or small for these legs, but also keep in mind to keep the numbers uneven because even numbers are hard to build with. For mine I know I want a second part in the front, so I add that too and then I build up the walls. When you already know of any extra parts you'd like to build, feel free to add them now before you bring up the walls. For now I am just using spruce planks and later deep slate for the roof. The texture comes later once we have everything figured out. When building in survival I recommend to build in the main gradients you want to use now to save time and materials. The walls should be rather high to fit the size, and that also allows us to add more parts to the house later. The walls in the front part are a bit lower though. For the roof I like it to get steeper to the top, but of course that doesn't mean you have to do that too. Build up the thing here first, then fill in the roof. Make sure to extend the blocks by 2 or 3 to add some depth to the build. With the smaller one in front we also add a bit of depth and this angle is already looking quite good. Next we want to add a few more parts to the house. Place yours where you'd like them to be, and I want mine to be a different color later, so I use that now to save time. One on each side will be enough, one smaller, the other a bit bigger. Of course we will add windows later, so these walls won't stay empty. Also let's add another part at the bottom to later help connect the base to the legs. Maybe a balcony would also look nice and also will give a great view of the surrounding area. Another platform in the front where I built the door. For a house this size a combination of trapdoors and doors works best so that the door is not too small. We want it to look like the main entrance, big and impressive. Make sure to place the door so that it is a bit inward for some extra depth. Another small door as a side entrance and a few fences to make everything safe. Now pretty much just windows are missing. The whole build is more of a hut, so I don't want my windows to be too complicated. A few bigger and smaller rectangles and squares here and there will do. Just go around the build and place somewhere you think they will fit in. To fill them in I am using scaffolding, but glass panes and trapdoors also look great. Definitely also have some in these attached building parts. Unfortunately, I forgot to record how I built the chimney, but to fit the style of the build, make sure to have it bent and not have to go straight up, as that would be boring. And with that, we can also start texturing the build. You see, the block palette I am using has a lot of bones, logs and many different blocks. If you build in survival, it is a lot of work to collect all of these different blocks, but you don't have to use them all. Instead of logs, you can use planks. Leave out those blocks you don't have. You can always come back to a build and exchange blocks. For the legs, you could also use deep slate and stone instead of black wool. Or you could also come up with an all-black palette. Your build is your build and doesn't have to look like this. So now that we are already looking at the chimney, let's start with it. Gradients always look good, but you can also add spots of texture. On top I place walls to make it go thinner and build smoke out of glass. Keep in mind that your build is moving, so the smoke gets left behind. Another option would be to use campfires instead. Let's do another gradient in the roof, going from a mossy spot here to a light grey here. Or is it more like dark grey to light grey? I'm using blackstone, deep slate tiles and bricks, deep slate, mud and my favorite block tuff. For transitioning green to grey, mossy stone is great. Also I sneak in some grey glazed terracotta and diamond ore. The house is darker at the bottom and gets lighter to the top, but I also built in some reddish spots. The bottom is a bit greenish with the jungle logs and even some more moss. The texture on this one is quite rough to make the house look very natural, old, used and weathered. Take your time with each block and try out different ones. For the colored parts I use blocks that are not too different. Texturing a build takes the most time of it all, figuring out where which block would be fitting. Coming back to the legs, it is now time to connect them a bit better to the house. They are quite whimsical after all, aren't they? So first of all, thicken out the upper part. Just add blocks without thinking too much, then smooth them out so nothing sticks out weirdly. Make sure it looks good from all sides, it doesn't have to be perfect though. To texture the legs, take a lighter colored block than used before. In my case, I will use blackstone and for even lighter areas tuff. Then think about where light might hit the legs and use your blocks accordingly. Usually it is the side facing up, but the higher you go, there would be a shadow coming from the house. So for the upper part you could also use a darker block, in this case black concrete would be fitting. To make the texturing of the legs extra, you can try out glass blocks and paints. They make it look softer, but with color paints you can also add a tint of color to your build without using a full block. For shadows, blue works well. Basically it is the same as in a painting where you try to avoid black, but instead use blue and brown. Details are what really bring this build together and are quite fun to build. To add details to these empty walls, I am using walls and fences to create vertical lines. They are not too obvious, but tie everything together nicely. The bottom doesn't look too connected yet, so what about building a few feathers? Just take the block of your choice, build diagonal lines going down and thicken them out a bit. Also you can have a mix of dripstone, fences, walls and chains hanging from the base of the house. Other than looking cool, they do hide awkward spots quite successfully. After all, this is a witch hut, but I imagine the witch living in this fancy house weather friendly, so with the details I will try to show that. A shelf with some flowers seems fitting. Similar to the vertical lines, you can use horizontal lines to break the surface of otherwise empty walls. Slabs or campfires are great for this. To light up the house's way, create a nicely curved branch going forward with a big lantern. Any glowing block with trapdoors works. But somehow you have to get inside the house. Considering you're not always flying on a broom, a ladder will do. But remember to leave out the bottom block, otherwise mobs might follow you up. The roof is looking rather empty still, so let's start with adding grass on the moss. For this I love moss, grass, flowers, all no problem. But then you can also think a bit bigger. Maybe some spruce trees? Either use original Minecraft trees or build custom ones. This design is rather simple with a slightly crooked stem and the leaves spiraling down. Behind, another small window looks great. Well, you see in the design how it closes. On the other side, I want to go even a bit fancier than trees on the roof, mushrooms on the roof. Another very cute but expensive design would be to place a mushroom block on an endward. The final detail I want to add are some flags hanging down the railing. Even a witch needs to do laundry, doesn't she? With that, I'd call this build finished. Congrats on watching until here. When you'd like to have a closer look to this build for yourself, there is a link to download it below. I know I jumped a lot from doing one thing to another, but maybe that's also the nature of this build. Messy. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until the next time, goodbye.